QSO Today, episode 312, Don Minkoff NK6A. This episode of QSO Today is sponsored by ICOM America, makers of the finest HF, VHF, and UHF transceivers and accessories for the radio amateur, reminding you to check out their new IC705 all-band portable transceiver. More on this later. And to buy QRP Labs, makers of the popular QCX kit transceiver and a whole host of parts and kits for the ham radio builder. Be sure to visit both ICOM and QRP Labs in the exhibit hall at the QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo on August 8th and 9th. As I'm recording this QSO Today, our QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo has over 16,000 registered hams. Thanks to all of you who are promoting this event and have volunteered to help. I was interviewed Friday morning at 4 a.m. by Neil Rapp on Ham Talk Live. We are now in the final 2 weeks before the convention, busy loading and debugging the platform so that we hope to have an excellent user experience. We are writing the book on how to pull this off. As I said on Neil's show, we are learning a lot of new skills. Stay tuned to the Ham Expo website for updated information. Welcome to the QSO Today podcast. I'm Eric Guth, 4Z1UG, your host. As I'm overwhelmed with the preparation for the Expo, the interview this week is an encore of the interview that I had with Don Minkoff NK6A that I did with Don in episode 158 in August 2017. Don is one of the coming Expo speakers. Don has a love for all things QRP and SOTA and tells his story in this remastered episode of QSO Today. NK6A, this is Eric, 4Z1UG. Are you there, Don?
This is NK6A in Los Angeles.
Don, thanks for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. Can we start at the beginning of your ham radio story? When and how did it start for you?
I was thinking of that question, and I believe in 1958, 3 houses away from where I lived and grew up in Panorama City, California, in the San Fernando Valley, I went to school with a youngster. His name was Johnny, and his father, Charlie, W6NQX, was the ham of the neighborhood. And I would be down at his house all the time, and I don't think I paid a lot of attention to ham radio at the time. But Saturday nights, when the family was watching Gunsmoke on Channel 2 on the old black and white Emerson TV with the bow tie antenna outside, Charlie was on 10 meters working DX with his Helicrafters HT something, 837, I think. And 10 meters and Channel 2 did not get along very well back then. And with, 300 ohm twin lead as the de facto lead-in for TVs at that time, he would interfere with our television. Lots of hash. You could hear, it was on AM those days. And I would be going down to his house and ask him to quit. And it was a matter of just staying in the house and telling him to quit. I would sit in his shack and listen to all the DX coming in. He let me talk on the microphone. He'd even let me plug in his coil sets for the bands into his HR50 Hammerlin receiver, and I got hooked. So I'd be spending a lot of time in his shack. His shack was actually a shack inside the garage. And, my mother would come down to tell me it's dinner time and drag me back home. So I was always at his house, and I got hooked on ham radio then. And later, Valley Electronics had an instructor. His name was Bill, W6DDB, I believe. He worked at Lockheed, and he gave a novice class at the store. And I believe it might have been Wednesday nights. I was able to get a ride there with my father. And I took the novice class, and I became licensed in August of 1959. My call sign was WV6HYF.
Seems somewhat unusual, although I've heard that before, V instead of N.
Well, I think earlier in the early mid-50s, they were using KN6s, and then they went to WV6s. And there was also a WN6, I believe. But there was a group of us that had similar call signs because we all went to the same class and took the license at the same time. And so I was WV6HYF, and I saved up my paper route money and I bought a Helicopters SX99 from Thrifty Electronics. It might have been $125 back then. And I hooked up a dipole on the roof of the house. Now, our house wasn't 66 feet long, and I just made it as wide as the house, and that was it. So it wasn't resonant, and I didn't know much back then. And I might add that Charlie was very limited in his vision, so I would help him all the time in the shack, and it's not something he could help me as a mentor put up antennas and such. So I was on my own a lot. And later, when I did get my license, I bought a used Heathkit DX40. And I bought it used from Henry Radio on Olympic in West LA. I don't recall how I got there at the time, because I certainly at 12 years old wasn't driving. But that was a great little radio. I used a knife switch, and I remember this very clearly to go between transmit and receive. And if you forget to turn the transmitter off and you touch the knife switch, you got an RF burn, of which was a good reminder not to do that.
Right, and all this stuff is going on in your room with your parents. They have no idea that this is happening.
Well, my mother had no consideration for my trying to work radio when she was doing house chores. And my big DX as a novice was Hawaii. I had interference from her vacuuming. When it's time to vacuum, that's what she would do. And it was rough. But I had, I had my bedroom. I was building model airplanes at the time. I had my radio station set up. I even replaced the glass window at plexiglass so I could bring the coax cable into the room. And later I picked up a used high gain vertical that was outside the house, which worked a lot better than my shortened dipole. At the time, the dummy load was, I think, a 60-watt light bulb, very crude. I didn't know very much. I did buy a handbook, but I don't know. There was something, not having a mentor at your, being able to help you at your own house, it was probably a handicap for me. Now, Charlie had a good friend, Bud, WA6AXH, who worked in, I think, for 20th Century Fox or someplace in the movie industry. And he would come over and help Charlie all the time and gave me advice. So those were my two mentors growing up as a novice.
Now, did you join a club there in order to upgrade to general?
The local club was the San Fernando Valley Radio Club. And at the time, they met in Van Nuys, which wasn't walking distance to me. So I went infrequently to meetings. And I did try to take the general class twice. I remember taking the bus down to downtown L.A. Actually, it was two buses. I had to transfer in Hollywood. And unfortunately, the first time I think I failed the code test. It was 13 words a minute. And the second time, I passed the code test, but I missed a few of the theory questions. So something happened where I just decided to focus on, I started junior high, and the junior high had a radio station, by the way, at Robert Fulton Junior High, but I wasn't there very long, and I got transferred to a new school that opened up. And consequently, school extracurricular activities, ham radio took a back seat, and it took me 8 years to get my general class.
So you're out of school by this time. But let's go back. We touched on this before we started recording, and that was you grew up in the San Fernando Valley in Southern California, as I did. I grew up in Southern California and spent some time in the Valley. What was unique about the San Fernando Valley in terms of electronics?
Well, beside all the electronics stores, the Valley Electronics, Thrifty Electronics, Sandy Electronics, Lafayette, there was a number of surplus stores that were generally out in North Hollywood, Sun Valley area of industrial areas off of San Fernando Road in the Valley. And those were a treasure trove of military surplus, electronic surplus, wire, cables, anything you can think of, you can buy at the surplus store very inexpensively. It was not always possible as a youngster who didn't drive to get out there, but when I did, it was lots of fun.
I mentioned this to you before that my grandparents lived 4 houses behind Sandy's Electronics in Canoga Park. So from the time I could walk there by myself, I spent every weekend combing the aisles of Sandy's Electronics until they started to wonder whether or not I was someone's lost child. That's where I got my first taste of electronics, was in Sandy's Electronics in Canoga Park. Do you remember your first contact as a novice?
I have the original log here, and I didn't... at the time when we were novices, and for many years, the FCC required you to log even your CQs. I have many pages of CQs with no answer, kind of depressing. And it was my antenna. But, as a novice and crystal controlled, you would transmit. I remember one of my frequencies, I think, was 7199 on 40 meters and 21 something on 15. I had probably 8 crystals. And, you would be tuning all around your transmit frequency to work other novices because everybody was crystal controlled. I didn't make a lot of contacts, but it's a funny, later looking through my log, somebody I know that lives nearby, W6KC, Jim, he was a novice living in Los Angeles someplace, and I worked him as a novice. So I basically have known him since 1959, which is kind of incredible. And he lives near me now in Santa Monica.
Did ham radio play a part in the choices that you made for your education and career?
Well, it made a big part, even though I wasn't licensed for, between novice and general for 8 years. My career choice was engineering. And after high school, I went to Valley College and started an engineering program. I also got a part-time thanks to electronics at a company that made plotters, XY plotters, used for pattern cutting, and they used Nixie tube readouts for the XY coordinates. And I don't remember what I did there, but my background helped me get the job. I foolishly took one class less than what was required to stay out of the military draft. I got drafted, went into the Air Force instead of being drafted into the Army or Marines. And this was in 1967. And because of my electronics background and the placement test, I was able to go into electronics and avionics in the Air Force. And that's when I consequently took my general class and passed it again. So in 1968, I became WA6IYK. And I was working on airplanes and avionics. We had a radio station at the base, and life was good.
Did you do a 4-year stint in the Air Force?
I did a 4-year plus 2-year stint in the Air Force, and my final assignment was in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where we had a really nice 4-element quad at our little radio station there. I had my own station set up in the club station. I had a Yaesu station I picked up in Hong Kong. Yeah, it was a good time. I wasn't necessarily chasing DX for DXCC at the time, and consequently, I probably went behind my country count by not keeping up with QSLing back then. From the Air Force, I went back to school, and I decided to change career paths into broadcasting, actually, radio, television, and film. But once again, ham radio to the rescue. I worked at the college radio station, and I also had part-time jobs using my electronics background at RCA and avionics, and a test equipment company that I would be doing final QC. They were repairing test equipment for the television industry.
This was in the Los Angeles area?
In the Los Angeles area, Van Nuys.
Where did you go to school?
I went to Cal State Northridge, California State University Northridge. So at the time at Cal State Northridge, I was working, I did an internship at a public radio station, and then I was also working as engineering in the radio station at the college, KCSN. And I also had my own radio show at another station in Long Beach. So I was trying to get into radio, basically.
How did that go? Did you end up with a career in radio, or did you stay on the engineering side?
The career, I was a little older student than most people since I spent 4 years in the Air Force rather than 4 years in college. So some of the jobs offered me to get into radio were not in geographically desirable locations. And I had just met my wife then, too. So I didn't feel like moving to India or someplace, Santa Barbara, where I couldn't afford to live, where the jobs were being offered. And I found a job, once again, using my radio electronics background with a company doing navigation on board ships, shipboard navigation. It was very new back in 1979. And I was working on PLL circuits. I was hired as a field engineer doing installations and repair of, sat-nav systems on board commercial ships, tankers, and cargo ships. But I was still looking for the job, and I found the job. It combined my electronics background and theory with my movie-making capabilities and script writing with a computer company making audio-visual films and training films for technicians. So it was really an ideal job for me, perfect job for me. And unfortunately, the company got sold and, things, I had to look for another job. And I once again went into electronics as a quality inspector and technical manager. And I did that for 8 years. So all my activity has always been related to ham radio in a fashion where I used my electronics background, my knowledge of circuitry, of components to help me in my career. And finally, I got on a path for a career that lasted over 20 years in automotive electronics, and worked for a company supplying navigation and audio systems for the automobile industry. And that was perfect for me because I could combine my skills from school in making reports, PowerPoint presentations, and my electronics background and doing analysis on vehicles. And then my ham radio background worked where we were also doing motorcycle communications. They had CB radios installed. And since I knew RF, I knew SWR, I knew how to do field measurements, it was invaluable for a number of years. So, and I met lots of other hams, in the auto industry. So that was kind of fun. So that was my last 20 years were spent in automobile, audio and navigation systems.
And you got to stay in Southern California the whole time.
Well, I traveled a lot. I was always going out to dealerships, either in training or in troubleshooting. When the XM Sirius satellite system in North America first came out, I was heavily involved with that and traveling to the East Coast a lot, traveling to Japan, traveling to Hong Kong and China for doing auditing of companies that we were using to manufacture. I started taking little radios with me on some of these trips, at least to the East Coast. I guess if we jump ahead, I built a little Elecraft K1 radio, QRP. At the time, it was 2-band, later 4-band. And I started taking that with me. If I knew I was going to be gone a week, I would take that with me on a trip. So that was kind of fun.
And now this message from ICOM America. Get out and be active with ICOM's new IC705 and its optional multifunction backpack. The ICOM IC705 is your perfect QRP companion, as it has many of the same base station features and functionality of ICOM's bigger rigs. At the tip of your fingers, in a portable package covering HF 6 meters, 2 meters, and 70 centimeters. This compact rig weighs in at 1 kilo or just over 2 pounds, with RF direct sampling for most of the HF band and IF sampling for frequencies above 25 megahertz. The ICOM IC705 has a large 4.3-inch color touchscreen with live band scope and waterfall, similar to the IC7300. I can't wait to get my IC705 to use as a baseband rig for satellites and microwave projects, including the S-HALE geosynchronous satellite. The ICOM IC705 puts out 5 watts with its BP272 battery pack and a full 10 watts when connected to an external 13.8-volt power supply. The rig does single sideband, CW, AM, FM, as well as full D-Star functions. Other features include micro USB connector, Bluetooth and wireless LAN over Wi-Fi, integrated GPS with antenna and GPS logger, a micro SD card slot, and the HM243 speaker microphone is standard equipment. As this is the perfect QRP or QRPP rig, the perfect accessory for the IC705 is the optional LC192 backpack with its special compartment for the IC705 and room for accessories for SOTA activations or just a day social distancing in the park. For more information on this fabulous new rig, click on the banner in this week's show notes. And when you go to buy your new ICOM IC705, be sure to tell your dealer that you heard about it here on QSO Today. My thanks to ICOM America for sponsorship of the QSO Today podcast. What's your favorite operating mode?
My favorite operating mode is CW, and it might be because of my musical background. It's just it's relaxing to me. I don't like sideband too much. I get on some sideband contests. I usually lose my voice halfway through a contest, and it just seems like I don't want to stereotype people. There seems to be more politeness in CW operating than there is sideband.
Because of the word speed, perhaps.
Maybe.
You have to choose your words carefully.
Yeah, but in the contest, you're just exchanging a serial number or a signal report in a state or a zone, and it goes by very quickly. But I just find CW relaxing.
So what's the best way to operate CW for you?
The best way?
Or what is the preferred way that you like to operate CW?
My CW operating comes in like 3 phases. Just casual at home, making a few contacts a day on CW. In contest, I'm a casual contester. I don't go out to win. I used to, QRP-wise, try to, at least win the state or the section or, the division. But lately, I get great pleasure in operating portable CW. It's just another facet of, taking a radio on a little trip, either by bicycle, by hiking, or by plane, and setting up and operating. And I find that the most enjoyable because you're setting up temporary portable battery and to make a few contacts. And if you get a DX contest, it's really icing on the cake.
So, Don, what's in the NK6A Go bag?
The NK6A Go bag today consists of my KX2. It consists of, I have many antennas to choose from. My favorite antenna, which is really, really quick, all band, is my 31-foot end-fed wire. It's a 26-gauge wire with a homemade 9-to-1 unun, and it's a 18-foot carbon fiber pole that I guy, and I'm on the air instantly, and it's lots of fun.
So you'll go to a city park or you'll go to a mountain clearing and throw out the wire and start operating?
That's it. Just last week, I went for a bicycle ride out to the beach, and there's a park there, and I set up under a tree, and I operated for an hour and a half.
How did you get into CW? Were you always a CW operator once you got your general class license?
Being a novice, your only choice was CW or phone on VHF. So CW was my first entry into operating. What I didn't tell you earlier is how I learned CW. I had this little cardboard semaphore toy that I think the Navy gave out, and it had the code in the back of the card, and you pressed it, and it went from black to white. So you could, flash the code. And I would sit in the back of my father's 52 Studebaker and practice the code as we were driving out to Los Angeles to visit my grandmother. So I learned the code a very unusual way. Then finally I built a little one-tube code oscillator that I think the plans were in the handbook that had lots of hum, but it was a code oscillator nonetheless. And I just find CW, the radios are smaller, They're lighter, and it gets through where sideband sometimes doesn't.
Now, how'd you get into QRP then?
Well, QRP began for me in 1980. There was an ad for the new Heathkit HW8. Well, they had a HW7 before that, but somehow the HW8 caught my attention, and it just looked so cute and small. My wife and I would always go camping back in the early days of our getting together, and I would be taking with me, I had an Argonaut 509. I would take that with me, but and then later I got an ICOM 730, a little more power, and I would drag a big, heavy 12-volt marine battery with me, and we'd set up in a campground, and I'd set up a dipole, and I'd operate. And then when the Heathkit came out, it was so much smaller, I could use a smaller, I think I used a lantern battery, and I discovered the QRP Amateur Radio Club International group that was 5 watts or less, and that seemed like lots of fun. And I started participating in their little contest and in the activity. And this was before internet, of course. And I just found it relaxing to make a contact. And the HW8, I think, was only 3 watts, super heterodyne. Just found it lots of fun, and taking it portable was much easier than the old ICOM. Smaller, lighter wires for antennas and good battery life. So somehow I just I like QRP.
I've spoken to a number of QRP operators on the QSO Today podcast, and one of the things they all say is QRP is not easy for beginners who are just getting into operating CW or just getting into radio, because it requires a certain amount of skill. What kind of skills are the most important to have as a QRP operator?
Well, that's all very true, and the skill required is listening. The skill required is when and how to operate, and not get frustrated at not making contacts. A lot of people, and I see this with a lot of newer hams, that their first radio is a QRP style radio. They get a little frustrated because they're not making contacts right away. And, part of it might be their antenna, their location, but, there are certain frequencies that are watering holes for the QRP group, 14060, for instance, 21060, 7030 to 7040 on 40 meters. And we tend to hang out around there. So it's easier to make a contact with a like-minded QRPer than it is to go down in the lower portion of the band and call CQ and not get an answer. It's not impossible to not get an answer, but you have to know how to time it, how to call CQ. And the antenna is, when you're running low power, the antenna is the most important part of your rig.
You're very active in SOTA, or Summits on the Air. How did that start for you? Summits
on the Air started, hanging around the novice, the QRP frequencies on 14060. I think it was in 2012, I would be copying some stations giving out SOTA identifiers, the mountaintop number. And I would log them, but I didn't do anything with it. And then I researched it more. And at the Pacificon convention up in Santa Clara, or San Ramon at the time, in Northern California, there was a presentation by Steve, WG0AT, and he talked about Summits on the Air, showed a little video, and I got that started two things. It really got me hooked on SOTA, and so I joined up online. It's an internet-based activity, and based out of England, and it started for them back in the early 2000s, but it didn't really catch on here till late 2009, and I started. I went through my log and I saw that I had so many contacts, and I entered them in the online log database, and I was on my way. And then, you get the same number of points as the chaser, as the activator gets when he's on a mountaintop. for a Colorado peak, let's say that's worth 6 points, and that's based on the altitude of the mountain, I would get 6 points. And if the activator makes 4 contacts, he would get 6 points. Now, I can work that same peak every day and get 6 points, where the activator can only receive his 6 points once per year. So I started collecting points, and before I knew it, I had 100 points, and then I had 200. And at the same time, I said to myself, I could give a presentation like this. I wanted to give back. I've been attending ham conventions and radio club meetings, and there are people that are sharing their stories and giving talks. And I thought, I should do something like that. I have a lot to share. So I put together a PowerPoint presentation at that same convention the following year in 2013. And I borrowed, there's lots of, I did a lot of research. I asked, borrowed pictures from people. And I put together a PowerPoint presentation on Summits on the Air at the next year's convention. And it went over extremely well. And it boistered my ego. And then I got asked to do it at a club meeting that somebody saw me, and I went to a club meeting. I went to a number of club meetings since then, but a Pasadena Amateur Radio Club. And all of a sudden, I'm in demand to do these talks, so I improved it. And then I also made another presentation on QRP. There was something lacking. The following year, somebody didn't show up at the convention that was supposed to give a talk. And I said, it was right after my talk, actually. So I continued my talk into QRP somewhat and says, next year I'll do a talk on QRP. And, I showed that the equipment you could buy and the progression of, how I started, antenna selection, the different contests and organizations that are catering to QRPers, and how 5 watts is only 2 S units down from 100 watts. So you shouldn't be dismayed at you're not being heard if you call CQ. And so all of a sudden I'm in demand for my QRP talk. And so with Summits on the Air, I continue to improve my talks. I continue to try to activate now. I was so proud when I made 1,000 points, and they have all these little silly certificates and accomplishments when you reach certain goals. And I became a shack sloth, which is 1,000 points, in which my wife pointed out that you were always a shack sloth.
As a shack sloth, that meant that you were a chaser?
Yeah, a chaser is a shack sloth, and a mountain goat is an activator.
I see.
And they're both at the 1,000-point level. I now have over 11,000 points.
Now, in Southern California, there's no shortage of summits.
We have over 3,700 summits.
In California or just in Southern California?
In California, the whole state. And it doesn't mean they're all active or they're all accessible. A lot of those summits are on private land. And as you can surmise, usually a summit also has a radio site on board because it's high up on top, and they can put repeaters and cell phones and all kinds of communications up there. And they're fenced in, but you have an allowance that you don't have to be at the very top of the summit to make contact. There's what they call the activation zone. And you can be within so many linear feet vertically from the top to be active in that zone.
Do you have your Southern California Edison key?
I wish I did. There's a number of, Santa Monica has a lot of summits, the Santa Monica Mountains, where I tend to frequent. In the San Gabriel Mountains off Highway 2, and there's many, many summits. Whether, right now it's too hot to be hiking in my neck of the woods here, unless you start very early in the morning.
Well, I remember the Santa Monica Mountains also have some very interesting former government installations.
Well, yeah, there's a a few Nike sites. Actually, the one Nike site is really not a summit. The summit has to be qualified to be a summit and has to be a certain height above other surrounding sites, summits. And the one Nike base that was, I actually operated there for a field day. It was off of Mulholland Drive, off of Sepulveda Boulevard, going towards the Getty Center. That was an interesting. It's also a mountain bicycle route that you can go all the way down to the beach. Yeah, there's a couple of Nike sites in the San Gabriel Mountains, and then also the Santa Monica Mountains from the leftover from the 50s and 60s.
Yeah, those were the days. What's the most exotic summit that you've been on? It seems to me that you've actually done some international SOTA. So, what are the most exotic SOTA places you've activated?
I'm not going to call this. I'll get to that. I just, as an embarrassing moment for me in activating a summit, and this is one of the early summits I did. I think it was 2013. On my way to the convention, there's a SOTA map. You can look at, what SOTA sites are within your area, and there was a SOTA site off of Highway 152, Pacheco Pass, that I would be taking to go towards Gilroy to a convention. And I spent the night in Los Gatos. I think it was Los Gatos. No, it was, off of Highway 5. And then across the mountains, I found the summit and the trailhead, and I decided to activate that summit. I had planned to activate it. I got up there about 8:30, 9 o'clock, and I found the summit. I activated. I was using my KX3 at the time, Elecraft, and a vertical antenna. And I had a great time, made lots of contacts. I packed up, and it was very foggy and overcast. And I had lost the map that I had stuck in my back pocket that you pick up, a trailhead map that they give you. And I got lost. And I wandered around for 2.5 hours looking for my way back. There was lots of trails there, and they were all marked with names, but I had no idea where I was. I did have my cell phone with me, which wasn't a smartphone. And I called my wife and trying to get her on the computer and look up where I am and help me out. I had to eventually call the Rangers, and they came and rescued me. Very embarrassing. All I wanted was just directions to find the right trail, but all of a sudden 2 trucks came up and rescued me, and I was thankful for the ride back to my car. That taught me a lesson, and I teach this lesson in my talks. Have a compass with you, or a smartphone with you that has a compass. And more importantly, I bought the day I got back from that trip, I went down to the sporting goods store and I bought a handheld GPS. So now there was no excuse to get lost. I also got a smartphone because of the applications that are inherent with the SOTA activity. You can now look up where you are. You can pick up maps. And with the smartphone, you have a compass. So that will never happen to me again. Now, as far as an exciting time as a summit, in Ireland 2 years ago, I had picked, I knew I was going to Ireland. And I knew I always take a radio with me on vacations, always. And this was no different. I also contacted, one nice thing about ham radio and being a DXer, you can contact people in those countries and get in touch with like-minded individuals. And in my case, I got in touch with a fellow in Ireland that was into SOTA, and he explained to me some of the summits I was interested in going and where they were and how to get there and where to park. And so I picked 3 summits to go to. Unfortunately, I only was able to activate one of those summits due to, when you're on vacation, the family comes first and sightseeing comes first and radio comes second or third. But, my wife is very understanding, and she allows me time to do my radio, and I send her off shopping. So we have a really great understanding because I don't like to shop. I like to operate. So in Ireland, she did come with me, and we both had colds. So it was the final activation was, in my only activation, was the last day in Ireland near the town of Tullamore. And it was a harrowing drive on the wrong side of the highway, shifting with my wrong hand, going up mountain roads that were, they might have been dirt, and in this little Mini Cooper. And then we got lost. And people in Ireland are so friendly. This woman talked to us and gave me directions, and and we finally found a park. And my wife sat in the car, and I hiked up to this mountaintop, Krogan Hill it was called, and I had to climb through 2 barbed wire fences, dodge cows, and I finally made it up there and set up. And my first 2 contacts were North America. Now that was at 12:30 Ireland time, so it was really early in the morning on the East Coast. They were K4 stations, and you can imagine how excited I could get, to have those first 2 contacts in North America. Now I want to say something. The day before, I alerted we have an alert system, which is kind of nice. There's a SOTA network on the internet that allows you to place alerts when you're going to operate, approximate time and frequency. So people that are chasing you know how to find you. And also, when you call CQ, if you're picked up by a reverse beacon network, and this is only for CW, it will, the software will allow other stations to see that you're on the air as a summit station if you made an alert. So it takes your call sign, matches it with your alert status, and then puts out a spot that you're on the air. I worked a station in Canada and 2 stations in the south of North America. And then I worked another SOTA station in Switzerland. And that's a summit to summit. So that's also exciting. So, lots of countries I worked. I believe I also worked Israel, a 4X station. So after about 45 minutes, I had 23, more than enough, in the log. And I packed up and ran back down the hill and back through the barbed wires. And, I had to take my pack off, slide it between the barbed wire, and then crawl between them without getting stuck, and then keep going. Got to the car. We went to a pub and celebrated. And then the next day we flew off to back home. So that was my most exciting adventure, SOTA-wise.
Hey, this is Eric for just another short break. One of my favorite ham radio podcasts is the Ham Radio Workbench podcast, hosted by George, KJ6VU, my guest in episode 232, and Jeremy, KF7IJZ. George and Jeremy take a bi-weekly deep dive into their favorite ham radio workbench projects and the technologies that fascinate them. If you want to be a ham radio builder or just be inspired, click on the link in this week's show notes page.
Now, have you activated any summits on private property? And what did you do in order to make sure that you were okay?
I did. Another ham who I know from the DX community, who used to live here in Southern California, who's also a SOTA person, N6KZ, his name is Jim. He lives in Prescott, Arizona. We both go to the DX convention every year in Visalia, California. My club helps put it on. I was looking at the map. I always look at maps to see what SOTA summits are nearby where I'm going. And there was a SOTA summit in a little town on a private farmland. I forgot the name of the little hill. Smith Mountain, that's what it's called, Smith Mountain. And I knew it was private, but I was trying to get permission to go up there. And I couldn't find the owner of the property. It was very difficult. So we decided to drive up there anyway. It was about 20 miles from our hotel. And then we had to drive through an orange grove, and we could see the mountain. So as we were trying to decide whether we should do it illegally or not, the ranch foreman saw us and drove up, and we talked with him, and he gave us permission. So we lucked out there. We also had to cross a couple of barbed wire fences because of, there's always cattle grazing on these pieces of property. But so we were the first two to activate this. It's never been activated before. And so that was successful. And that was our private property activation.
Now, for people that aren't familiar with SOTA, and I can't say that I've spent any time checking it out, for each summit, is there information on these summits in terms of, based on actual experience, it's private property, kind of like geocaching sites? Is there like information about the summit so that anybody that wants to activate a summit that they haven't activated before, they'll actually know something about it?
On the SOTA.org website, there is information on each summit as to the location, if anybody has activated before. If somebody has tried to activate it, they'll make a comment that it's private. You really don't know it's private unless you do research. And one nice thing about being active in SOTA, you really learn how to read maps, use Google Earth. And if you punch in the name of the summit, if it has a name, some of them just have a designator as a number. But if it has a name, if you just Google that name or use a hiking website, you can see if anybody has hiked it. There's lots of, peak baggers and hikers and, geocachers that are up on these hilltops. And you can generally tell whether it's, private or not. There's a few of them in the Santa Monica Mountains you can't get to because it's private or it's it's some kind of facility that is not allowing you to get to it. And, just you can't get close enough even for the activation zone in some cases because the road going to that site is locked and closed. So, although we have in California over 3,000 summits, there's not a lot of them that are accessible. They might be someday, but, right now they're not. And, I guess there's a controversy whether they should be even listed or not, but they are.
So one of the goals in SOTA, then, is to be a first activator of a summit.
That's kind of a jewel. I was lucky to be on two of those already, the first activation. Is the one that we went to on private property, although there was two of us, and whoever got their login first or made the first queue per time became the first one. And I got beat out. I guess my antenna took longer to put up and make the first queue than my friend Jim. But, I had another incident in Arizona where I met him and we went on a summit that was only activated once before. And it was very steep, very rough, cactus, loose sand. And I fell down there and kind of injured my leg real bad. But I can't stress enough the importance of hiking safely, carrying a first aid kit. I use hiking poles now. Following the directions somebody else might have placed on the website. We didn't. We sort of went up the side of the mountain without using a trail, and that wasn't very smart. I was with a person that was more knowledgeable than me, but sometimes it didn't work out. Worked out for him, but not for me.
You mentioned earlier Steve Galshoot, WGOAT, or WG0AT. He was our guest in episode 45 of the QSO Today podcast. He uses goats to help schlep some of his equipment up to the top of the summit. Do you recommend doing SOTA with a buddy? Is this a kind of a buddy system thing, or does it make no difference to you, especially if you've got the radios and stuff, you have some way of getting rescued?
I recommend a buddy. And I've mentored two people. I've taken them up on mountaintops, and I like the companionship. I like the fact that if something happens, I can get help. But on the other hand, you hiking by yourself, and most people do that actually. You don't have to compete for the radio or the frequency and have interference when you're operating, and you don't have to set a certain time schedule as to when you want to leave or go. So many people here hike by themselves. They leave, at dark 30 in the morning, and they some of them start by headlamp to get up to the top by 7 or 8 o'clock so they can work into Europe. And I'm kind of a casual SOTA operator. I don't start that early, but I recommend a buddy only because of some past experiences I've had with falling down and injuring myself or getting lost. It's nice to have somebody else with you.
Right, and some of these summits may not be within cell phone coverage, or if you lose the radio or something, you could actually be stranded if you're injured out in the middle of nowhere.
That is correct. It's funny, one summit I go to quite often that's very close, and there's probably many cell sites across the way. I have no cell service there for my phone. It's an easy hike, and it's not too bad. And I think I've never run across a ranger in my hikes. A few other ones in Santa Monica I have, but there's not a lot of visitors. It's so many miles of coverage. There's not a lot of people. Sometimes I go during the week. Being retired, you have the luxury of not having to go on weekends, so you don't see as many people as you would on a weekend.
You gave a talk once to the Palos Verdes Amateur Radio Club about working QRP Maritime Mobile aboard a commercial cruise liner. Do you have any advice for hams who want to take HF rig on a cruise ship?
Well, yes. Actually, before I started doing presentations on SOTA and QRP, that was, I think, my first presentation. Taking radios with me on vacations all the time. We were scheduled for a cruise that started in Boston and went to Canada, and I knew I wanted to try a radio. I knew I would operate from land, and the radio at the time was my KX1, a little 3-4 watt 3-band QRP radio, also designed by Wayne Burdick. And I before I went on the trip, and this was in 1997, so it was quite a few years ago, I wrote letters to the captain, and I brought them with me on board the ship. And when I boarded the ship, the purser, I gave the purser the letters asking permission to operate and explaining what ham radio was, and that I wouldn't interfere with passengers and wouldn't put up any fixtures that would compromise the safety or the ship. And I waited a few days, and finally I got permission to operate, only while at sea, which I knew that. And so meanwhile, while I was waiting for permission, I was walking around the decks and looking for a good place to operate that would be out of the way of people. And I eventually settled on the 10th deck, which happened to be where the pool area was. And because we had an 8 o'clock dinner scheduled each night, and there was a first dinner at 6, the pool area cleared out at 6 o'clock. And that's when I would go operate. And I set up, I had a little Pac-12 vertical antenna that's still being made. And I set that up on a little tripod on a little plastic bench. And I ran the radials, the counterpoise underneath all the deck chairs. So you really couldn't see too much. And I started operating on 20 meters. And I made about 18 contacts, all in Slovenia, in the middle of the St. Lawrence Seaway. I was in heaven. Now, I did that twice. I only operated twice on board ship. And usually when we went into port, I would take it in my backpack and I would operate, for 30 or 40 minutes at a little park that I would find by the ship. I did that in Portland, Maine. I did that in Nova Scotia and in Montreal and Quebec City. Every Prince Edward Island, I would try to operate just to make 1 or 2 cues. But it's getting harder and harder to operate from a ship nowadays. This was not the same as today, and I don't think this was on the Holland America line. I'm not quite sure they're giving permission anymore, but certainly you could operate while in port on a VHF radio and make contact. I didn't bring a HT with me, just my little KX1, but I got to be maritime mobile. I got to be, it was a Holland America ship, so it was registered in Holland, so I was a stroke PA for Holland, Netherlands. And so I had a big, long call. I had, my call, PA, MM2.
And now this message from QRP Labs. QRP Labs has shipped thousands of QCX QRP transceivers kits to date. The odds of working another QCX user gets better every day. If you're looking for a satisfying kit experience where you end up with an amazing performing QRP transceiver for under $50, let me say that again, for under $50, then you owe it to yourself to go to QRP Labs. We have many home brewers who listen to the QSO Today podcast. For you, QRP Labs also has parts, filters, enclosures, and other handy devices to make your home brewing experience even better. You can use these parts to either enhance your QRP Labs kits or to beef up your own homebrew designs. Be sure to browse Hand's entire website. Use the link on this week's show notes page or the one in the sponsored section of the QSO Today website to get to QRP Labs to buy your QCX or any of the other fine QRP Labs kits or parts. QRP Labs is my go-to ham radio kit company. It should be yours too. QRP Labs. And now back to our QSO Today. Well, I think an interesting takeaway here is that the whole rig, including the antenna and stuff, was all self-supporting and wasn't clamped to a rail or tied to something on the ship. It was something that was easy to set up, quick and easy to set up and take down, and didn't have any physical impact on the ship itself.
That is correct. Although I was eyeing this backstay that was used to hang lights on that was made out of wire, big thick wire that if I had a big alligator clip, I could have loaded that puppy up. But I didn't.
I saw a picture of a full-dress motorcycle. Do you operate from a motorcycle? Do you travel on a motorcycle?
I go a couple of times a year on some big motorcycle trips, and I take a radio with me, and I don't operate while I'm riding the motorcycle. I concentrate solely on just keeping my eyes on the road and riding. But for instance, last year I went a couple of trips taking my KX2 with me. And because of the National Parks on the Air activity last year, I went to Monterey and Lassen National Park, and I went to the North Rim of the Grand Canyon. I went to the Lake Mead Recreation Area. I went also to a little Pipe Springs National Monument near the Grand Canyon. And I, took my little carbon fiber pole and my 31-foot wire and my KX2, and I was able to set up very quickly, and it was small enough to fit on the motorcycle, and that's how I did it last year. And I might add that with the, since I'm a CW guy, I didn't even think of taking a microphone with me, but one of the sites I was operating from, I was having a hard time getting out and making the required number of contacts. And for National Parks on the Air, it was 10 contacts needed for activation. And for SOTA, it's only 4. So I was tuning around the sideband frequencies, and I heard another station that I believe was in the White Sands National Monument on sideband. I worked him only because the built-in microphone in the KX2. I held it up to my face, and I called with I cranked up the power to 8 or 10 watts, and I worked him. And then he was through with the frequency, so I took it over, and I made a few contacts with the built-in microphone. So that was a nice surprise.
Well, I think the last time I was with Wayne, he showed me that you can do RTTY on the KX2.
Yes, I've done RTTY and PSK31. You can do it with the KX2 and the KX3, the whole Elecraft line, actually, the later model ones, that you put it in data mode. I mean, you have to know Morse code because basically you're sending with the key and it translates into RTTY, so FSK mode.
Right, and then when the reply in RTTY, you actually read from the bottom of the screen, right?
That is correct. The display is very cool. So you have a complete AM, FM digital station right at your fingertips.
You have an interest in music. You mentioned it earlier. What kind of interest do you have in music, and what do you do?
Well, I've been playing banjo probably since 1962 or 3, 5-string banjo, old-timey banjo. And I play pre-bluegrass music. It's similar, but I don't use finger picks. And I think, I also dabble a little bit in the mandolin and guitar. And but the banjo was my main instrument for many, many years. And, just playing at parties. We had a little, many, many years ago, starving student, we would do busking at the beach. And I think my love of CW comes from music. To me, CW is like music for some reason. And I just gravitated towards that. Now, I like RTTY too, and I might add that I got real serious a few years ago in getting my DXCC in the RTTY mode. And I did, and it was all on Logbook of the World, which was kind of nice.
This is doing RTTY with a KX2?
No, this was actually, I have two sides, The other side of me is a heavy-duty chaser of DX, and I have a K3 for that with the P3 monitor, and this is probably heresy. On top of that, I have a big alpha amplifier. And, when I get serious when I chase DX, and I have DXCC. Right now I have 303 countries confirmed. And I kind of lost interest in the 80s after I got DXCC, and I wasn't chasing so much. So I missed out on a lot of countries that aren't on the air right now. And they're, with conditions the way they are now, it's even, harder to get. I chase DX. I'm in a DX club. I'm in a contest club. And, but I keep going back to low power and QRP just because of the satisfaction.
Ham radio is such a big tent now that you can be both a QRP operator and a QRO. Is that QRO operator? Is that what it is?
Yeah, that is correct. Yeah.
And does your alpha amplifier like RTTY? Do you run it full bore on RTTY?
No, I run, actually, I have a little Elecraft KPA 500 solid state amp, and I use that mostly for RTTY at 500 watts. It just hums along very quietly, and I hardly use the alpha at all anymore. The only time the alpha gets turned on is when there's a rare DX station I don't have yet, and I'm trying to make a contact. Most of the time I run barefoot, either 100 watts or 5 watts. In contests lately, I've been running 500 watts. But, also we have, and I think you had a conversation a few weeks ago with Dave, N1IX. We're both involved in the QRP Fox hunting affair on 40 and 20 meters, where it's 5 watts or less. And I've been involved with that from the very beginning, so it's been like over 12 years. So twice a week or once a week for an hour and a half, we chase the foxes that are on the air. We are the fox, so that's lots of fun.
What kind of antennas do you have on your QTH?
Well, I have a Force 12 C4 it's a 7-element Yagi, and then I have a 31-foot end-fed with a 4-to-1 unon, 9-to-1 unon on the bottom. And I used to have a nice 80 meter dipole fed with open wire 400 ohm with a 4-to-1 balun. But, I had to make some compromises to the XYL here after we got a new roof, and that came down.
This begs the question then, what kind of impact has amateur radio then had on your family life?
Well, I think it's had a real positive effect. My wife married a ham, so she knew my addiction. And I think one of the early gifts she got me was a Shure Profi paddle from Germany that I fell in love with. And she's always, asking what I want and, radio related. The little carbon fiber pole I take everywhere with me now. She got me that for her birthday. She, last year, I fell in love with, I don't need it. I don't think any ham needs anything beside what they have already. But I fell in love with that KX2 only because it has a built-in battery. It's smaller and lighter than the KX3, and I thought it would be ideal for my motorcycle trips, which it is.
And it's a fun little rig.
It's a great it's a fantastic radio, and that was a gift from my wife. So she caters to my whims, which is really nice. Now we have a kind of a quid pro quo. I do all the cooking and shopping for her, so I guess
There's always a trade-off.
There's a trade-off.
I let my wife get a PhD, so we spent money on a PhD for 6 years, and she got it.
There you go.
Last week I sprung on her. I said, you know what, I really need a service monitor. And she says, okay. So I've got an HP 8921 coming in from North America, so I'm pretty excited about that. And she says, oh, that's so nice. And I said, yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, it's good when the XYL really doesn't have an interest, but she still supports it.
Well, when we go on vacations, as I mentioned, I like taking a radio with me all the time. And one of our early European, I always take one to Canada with me. We go to Canada quite often because we like to hike and canoe, and you can't beat the scenery and the fresh air up there. She always allows me time to operate. And our last trip to Canada, It was so many mosquitoes outdoors. I had to operate indoors, and we were in a log cabin, and I could operate indoors. There was no interference to the antenna I set up inside that cabin, and that worked out great.
And she was a good sport.
Very good sport. And when we went to Portugal, for instance, I befriended. Once again, SOTA. In the SOTA list, you see who is active in those countries are, doesn't matter where you're going, state. And you contact those people and you become friends with them, and then you meet them in person and they invite you to their house and they take you around, and, it's very satisfying, and they help you make a few contacts if it's a SOTA activity. And I planned to do a SOTA activity in Portugal, and there was one near where we were staying up in the Douro Valley. But that week we were there, it was like 37 degrees centigrade, very, very hot. And it was just too hot to be out climbing mountains and unfamiliar roads. But I looked on Google Maps, and I looked for places to operate on Google Earth that was near where we were staying. So in Porto, I found a park a block away. In the Douro Valley, we had our own little we were staying at a little estate kind of with our own cabin. So I was able to keep my antenna out all the time and operate. In the mornings, I would just do a few cues in the morning and in the evenings. So, all the other times were spent, in vacation mode. But it's kind of relaxing to make a few cues in the morning and be on my way. So that's we have a good understanding of operating when I need to and sending her shopping, and I'll go find a park to operate for a few hours, and it works out. We have a good understanding of radio time and family time.
What excites you the most about what's happening in ham radio now?
There's two things that excite me, and one is in SOTA activities. There's so many new hams that are getting involved with SOTA, and the new ham license here is no code. But they're finding out that they can make more contacts and easier knowing code, and they're learning code. So I think that's refreshing to see that a lot of new hams are learning code, and they'll get on the air and they'll make a comment to QRS and go 8 to 10 words a minute when they're making contacts, so they get their code speed up. So I think, and that CW Ops organization where they have classes for people to get their code speed up is nice. All the new digital modes are exciting. I haven't tried any of the new ones beside the couple of basic ones. But I guess for my wish list, I probably want to try some satellite work down the road.
And what advice would you give to new or returning hams to the hobby?
They can't be impatient when trying to make cues. The trouble, a lot of hams are real estate challenged. They live in condominiums or apartments, and they can't put up an antenna. But, they can certainly go to a local park and put up something temporary and operate. It's not the same as being at home, but you have to be creative at home. There's always a way to put up an antenna, either a stealthy antenna, but, once again, a stealthy antenna is not going to be able to take high power. So you have to basically run QRP with, 28 gauge, 26 gauge wire that you don't want to be seen. So it takes a skill set and patience. And I think it takes probably more mentoring at that stage to learn how to make contacts rather than, get frustrated that you're not making contacts and then sell the radio right away, which I can see often on the list.
I hope that the QSO Today listeners know that, with the internet now, there's all kinds of QRP Elmers out there who are willing to exchange an email or, hear a sorry story about not being able to make QSOs and get some advice. So I think that's really great advice, is don't be impatient.
Yeah, with YouTube, internet, and video, you can learn how to do anything online. It's just incredible. You just punch it in, and there's how to make an antenna, where to buy the parts, how to operate. And there's so many companies now catering to, you don't have to make your own. There's many companies now making stealth antennas, QRP antennas. Same with radios. You don't have to build it anymore. You can buy a ready-made, radio that is small and lightweight, battery operated. I mean, anything you need to learn is now available on the internet, something, we didn't have growing up. You have to have a real life mentors in an Elmer or join a radio club to get that help.
Well, Don, it was really a pleasure to speak with you today on QSO Today. So with that, I want to wish you 73, and thanks very much.
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure, and 73's to you.
That concludes this episode of QSO Today. I hope that you enjoyed this QSO with Don. Be sure to watch Don's presentation at the QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo coming up in 2 weeks. Be sure to check out the show notes that include links and information about the topics that we discussed. Go to qsotoday.com and put in NK6A in the search box at the top of the page. We are busy putting the final touches on the QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo, scheduled for August 8th at 45 minutes past midnight Zulu time or GMT time. This is 5:45 p.m. Pacific time or 8:45 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on August 7th. 15 minutes later at the top of the hour is Dr. Scott Wright, K0MD's keynote address, officially opening the 48-hour event. Please stay tuned to the QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo website for more information. Be sure to click on the banner on this week's show notes page. See you at the Expo. My thanks to both ICOM America and QRP Labs for their support of the QSO Today podcast. Please show your support of these fine sponsors by clicking on their links in the show notes pages or by using QSO Today in the coupon box at checkout. You may notice that some of the episodes are transcribed into written text. If you'd like to sponsor any of these episodes into written text, please push the button in the middle of the show notes page. Support the QSO Today podcast by first joining the QSO Today email list by pressing the subscribe buttons on the show notes pages. I will not spam you or share your email address with anyone. Please become a listener sponsor monthly or annually by clicking on the sponsor buttons on the show notes page. I am grateful for any way that you show appreciation and support. It makes a big difference. QSO Today is now available on a host of platforms, including Spotify, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and the iTunes Store. A list of these services is on the right side of the show notes pages. Stitcher is still my favorite. My thanks to my friend and colleague Ben Bresky, who makes every QSO Today interview guest and this host sound brilliant. Thanks, Ben. Until next time, this is Eric for Z1UG 73. The QSO Today podcast is a product of KEG Media Inc., who is solely responsible for its content.